Welcome everyone again to our first stop here of the tour. And this is a study I've been working on for about the past 3 or 4 years now, where we're trying to use aerial imagery from drones to help us determine when and where to apply nitrogen in our wheat crop. This project is part of the Smart Farm Innovation Network, which is a new networking center at Virginia Tech that falls under the Center for Advanced Innovation in Agriculture, where we're trying to use new technologies and new sensors to help us determine, help us make decisions in our crops and things of that nature. So, as I mentioned, this project falls under that new center. You'll probably be hearing more about the Center for Advanced Innovation in Agriculture here in the future. But anyway, the goal behind this project is, as I mentioned, is to help us determine when and where to apply nitrogen in our wheat crop. As I said, you go back and look at some historical data between tiller density in wheat and NDVI, which is normalized differential vegetative index, which is basically just an index that you can collect with the handheld green seeker. If you go back several years and look at the data, you see a good relationship between tiller counts in your wheat and handheld NDVI. And the tiller counts have often been used to help us determine when to apply the nitrogen. Like at growth stage 25, if you have above a certain number of tillers, then you don't really need to apply nitrogen. You can wait until growth stage 30. If you do not have adequate tiller density at that time, you can go and apply nitrogen at growth stage 25 as well as growth stage 30. So with this study, what we did, we looked at that historical data between the handheld NDVI and the tiller density, saw the good relationship that we have between those two. We're saying if we can get that relationship with handheld NDVI, how about NDVI from a drone? And so we started about 3 or 4 years ago trying to use a sensor here attached to the drone. This is just a red edge sensor, which looks at your red, green, and blue bands, and also your near infrared and red edge bands. It helps us to collect indices such as NDVI and NDRE, which is the normalized differential red edge. So the last 3 or 4 years, as I said, we've been going out. We have several tests like this throughout the state. We've got 2 locations this year. Over the past 4 years, we've had 8 to 9 locations across the state. And basically what we did, we went out and counted tillers for all these plots, and then we flew over them and collected the NDVI data. And basically what we did is we plotted the relationship between tiller density and NDVI. And if you look at your handout here, and this first graph shows the relationship between aerial NDVI and wheat tiller density across 4 locations from 2019 to 2020. And you see there's a very good relationship there between your NDVI and your tiller density. Have an R-squared value of 0.75, which shows a very good relationship there. So we've seen that. So our next step was to go through and say, all right, so we've been going through it at growth stage 25. We got 50 tillers or more, no need to apply nitrogen. If you got less than that, then you want to start applying some nitrogen. So we took those and we made a relationship with our aerial NDVI. So if you've got an aerial NDVI of 0.62, that corresponds to 50 or more tillers, then you probably don't need to apply nitrogen. And then going down, if you've got NDVI values lower than that, that is when you'll want to start applying your nitrogen there. So that's what we've done. We've taken this relationship you see in the top graph and brought it down here to try to make some nitrogen recommendations based on our aerial NDVI values. So if you turn over to the back page, then our next question was, we had good relationships, and we started applying nitrogen based on our NDVI, applying nitrogen based on tiller counts, and looking at the two to see how it related. So how does the nitrogen recommendation change between your tiller count and your aerial index? And then how did grain yield differ? Well, if you look at, we don't look at the chart yet, but so this past year when we did this for the first time, started applying the nitrogen based on the NDVI, there was the same plot showed no difference whether you applied it, whether you went out and counted tillers or you went and flew. Each time it recommended the same amount of nitrogen. So if you look at this graph here, in December we applied 30 pounds of nitrogen in December, and then that second number right up here shows how we applied our growth stage 25 nitrogen. So it was either applied based on tiller density or an index called NDVI or an index called NDRE. And you see each time it recommended to apply 40 pounds of nitrogen, and then again it recommended to apply 40 pounds at growth stage 25, and then we went back at growth stage 30 and applied the remaining 50 pounds. Anyway, so it recommended to apply the same amount of nitrogen between all three methods, and you see that there was no statistically significant difference in yield. So we're seeing the same yields, we're seeing the same amount of nitrogen being recommended to be applied. So that's kind of what this study is. We've got our first set of plots here has got all different nitrogen rates, so we can collect, we'll have different tiller densities and things to create this relationship with. And then going back through the next range and on further back is where we start applying nitrogen, either based on tiller counts, based on NDVI or NDRE from the drone. So just a few conclusions and our next steps. As I mentioned, aerial images collected from the drone to derive an index like NDVI can enable us to accurately determine tiller density. So instead of having to go out and physically count tillers, we can use this relationship here to help us determine what our tiller density is based on our values we're getting, our NDVI values. And we're still fine-tuning this relationship. We have a couple more studies in the ground this year, and then next year as well we'll have a couple more to continue to fine-tune this relationship here between the NDVI and tiller density. As I said, the aerial NDVI recommended the same amount of nitrogen at growth stage 25 as did if you went out and counted tillers. There's been no yield difference if growth stage 25 nitrogen was applied based on tiller density or NDVI. Of course, that makes sense since it recommended the same amount of nitrogen to be applied. And then finally, I just found out this study got funded, a future study got funded by the Virginia Agricultural Council to take this and to use on farm in large scale fields. So instead of doing this in small plots, we'll partner with some area farmers across Virginia, and we'll go across and count tillers and fly, and then apply nitrogen based on that in large scale fields instead of just small plots, and see if we're seeing the same kind of relationships and if you're seeing the same kind of results that we saw here in small plots. So if you are a farmer and you're interested in doing a study like that, get with me, talk to me, and I'll be happy to see if we can partner on that this coming year.